him or John or one of the guys.
Now I'm in.
Hey, that's all.
Is this like the kids? See, I was thinking, the kids here from here. Because we don't have access to lots of people. Is there going to be a parking back there?
We got 25 watchers.
25 watchers.
Yeah.
7 o'clock.
I'm
We start
ready.
getting paid when we get like 10,000.
It's 7 o'clock. We need to call the meeting to order. Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John, do you want to go first?
What?
Do you want to go first?
Oh. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
You need to read.
I can.
You need, okay.
As a part of our organization for the board, as we had set out the life cycle of the board 2 months ago, we were going to re-elect our board leadership this month. And in order to do that, the first step that we need to do is our current leadership needs to resign from their current positions.
Got it.
And then at that point in time, the key part when I talk to the KSB lawyers is to make sure that the recommended motion for new leadership includes the statement "and shall serve in the capacity for 1 year or until a successor is appointed." So that was our KSB lawyers' recommendation. So
I, John Dalby, the current Vice President of the usd469 Board of Education, hereby resign my position.
I, Bethany Stevenson, the current president of the Board of Education for USD 469, also hereby resign my position. And I would also like to nominate myself as president and John Dalby as vice president to resume in the capacity we were in previously.
I would like to nominate John Dalby for president and for vice president John Haddock.
I'll second that. Cheryl.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Hold on a second. So that would end in when, 21?
A year from now?
Never mind. I was just making sure that, because the election won't be until that fall. Okay.
correct.
I just didn't want to make, I'd like to see it as always one of the two, always on off cycles. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like either the president or vice president, so that if A, they don't run, or B, we would always have somebody that would continue on. Does that make sense on that?
But I don't think, I mean, if we're nominating in July and the election's in the fall, I do not think that that's a necessity.
No, okay, I mean, I understand that, but it won't be the fall next year. That's kind of a personal thing. I mean, I just would like to always try to have experience on, and, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then both the president and vice president say they don't run in November or whatever. I mean, I guess we'd know in June now.
Right.
On that, so, okay, okay. 'Cause I'll have it happen.
Any other discussion? I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 No, Michelle is no. John is
I said aye.
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 Aye. No.
Aye.
So the motion
Aye.
is 5-2. Motion carries. John, you're up.
You can stay there, Beth.
He needs the microphone. Okay.
Yeah, you've got it. That'll turn it on for good too.
He also needs the blue one.
There you go. It'll pick him up. Sean,
Okay. Well, thank you first of all for having that kind of confidence in me, and Beth, I really appreciate our time together. You're a very good mentor, and I appreciate what you did to hear me out when I had to speak and reach out to me when you had questions or concerns, so thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 2, the consent agenda. I personally have some questions, so if anybody else has any questions, please queue those up. So in regards to the contract that's mentioned here in 210, the provision for educational services, the question I have is, how are our contracts looking right now with the school year kind of up in the air? I don't remember because I just don't have that good of a memory, but
Sure.
Do all of our contracts bind us to pay if school doesn't happen in the traditional way?
well, in this case, when it's a contract of per hour type of thing, it would be whatever we're using. So we're
Right.
actually probably less on the hook than we would be if we had hired someone in order to do this. This is also one that, with our visually impaired students, we have some ways to fill those in-house, but this is when we need some additional coverage. This keeps us from having to fill that position on our own. So,
Okay, I know contracts are contracts, and we may be liable to, or we may be legally bound to pay some of them based on the wording, but
sure.
let's
This
just-
is a per use type of thing.
yeah,
so.
I'm tracking with this one.
Yep.
But we approved a bunch of contracts over the last 60 days, and just want to make sure that people don't come looking with their hand out.
Sure.
Because that's what they did last year. Okay, and then on 211, the textbook approval, is this just a retroactive approval, or is this a new?
These are some additional ones that got approved at our DLT. The reflex math, the LES reflex math, that will align us to go down to the 3rd grade, and so that'll be the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That was approved on 4/29, and we're bringing that to you this month. The LIS Social Studies Weekly, this is something that we've done over the past, but as we have gone through the new process of making sure that all curriculum resources are board approved, we're finally bringing it to you. That's something that we have done in the past at those grade levels. The other thing is that you see the new cost is not renewing Time for Kids and replacing that with the LIS Social Studies Weekly. Second Step kits, we've already approved the Second Step piece. We needed some additional kits as we continue to increase that implementation. And so the teachers that share those resources, it becomes very difficult to share those resources when I'm supposed to be using them all the time, so that was an additional cost.
Okay.
So Learning A to Z Learning is, a 1-year subscription on a 6-year adoption that the DLT approved on our 5/19. And then the last one, the middle school technology, not the last one, but second to last one, that's something that Mr. Averill had received some information April to make sure that he had some modules that were going out of circulation, and so in order to keep that up to date, we were spending a little over half of that cost anyway on something that was old, and Ron thought it was a good opportunity, and we spread that cost out actually over 2 years. So.
Those are all supplemental programs to our core curriculum, is that correct?
It depends on the course. The reflex math would be supplemental. The LIS Social Studies Weekly actually ends up being a large part of the core curriculum. Second Step is a core curriculum for social emotional learning. The Learning A to Z, that would be supplemental. The technology modules would be core curriculum in that area. Depending on, I see all of those supplemental or all those exploratories as core curriculum for them. And then the high school accounting is a core curriculum for CTE course of accounting.
So if I may ask, so what's our next push for curriculum?
Our next push for curriculum.
Yeah,
Social studies is the new set of standards that have just got approved, and so is PE and health. So those are next on our list.
thank you, Holly.
And those won't be quite as expensive as we bit off the big chunk this year with elementary school ELA.
And most expensive would be the K-12 ELA and math adoption.
Yep.
And Holly, the curriculum you just mentioned, that's for all grade levels?
Which curriculum?
Social studies.
Social studies, PE, and health
Well,
is,
technically, social studies, yes, it's at the elementary level, but elementary teachers are responsible for math, reading, social studies, and science, those classroom teachers. So we're focused on ELA this year, implementation of our new resource, so we won't be able to write curriculum and social studies simultaneously. So social studies and science for K-5 is still going to need to be a little bit out. But it'll be secondary social studies. Since they're departmentalized, it'll be easy to pull that little bit out of the curriculum. And so will the PE and health, because they're specialists at the elementary level.
so it's primarily for middle
It'll
school
be
and high school?
6-12 social studies and K-12 PE and health.
Okay.
And then implementation of our new ELA resource and then continued implementation of our math. And it's possible we'll do some 4th and 5th grade science. Science we really do need to address. But again, it's that balance of the teachers have all 4 core areas, and so they just have to let me know that they're ready. And 4th and 5th grade, it seems like they might be ready. They've gone through a representation model where 2 people are representing science, 2 are social studies, 2 are math, and 2 are ELA. So we will be working with the staff group, so it's possible we'll be able to squeeze some 4th and 5th grade science in as well.
That's something that we're really going to need feedback on from you, Holly, and the principals, is that depending on what next year looks like, the degree of difficulty might already go up by a factor of X, and then you want to throw a new curriculum on there too that may not be distance learning friendly, though it may, for the long term, it makes sense for brick and mortar schools, but, the teachers might have to manipulate that and don't already, they don't know it already, and now we got to manipulate it to use for distance learning
And the curriculum, the way that when we use the term curriculum, that's not our resource. We're using those as separate terms.
Okay.
So their textbook and their resource is something different. The curriculum is actually just a set of learning targets where the teachers have had conversations about what does this standard mean? What does it look like in the classroom? What vocabulary is part of the explicit teaching? So it's a little bit different. But I agree, teachers are going to have a lot on their plate this year. So if we cannot get to some of the curriculum work, I will be in constant contact with them, and if we can't do it, then that's okay. We'll work on what's most important, which is making sure the kids get a good education.
Yeah.
So if they can do it, we can probably do some of that virtually as well. So we'll just kind of see what the year brings. But I'm working on preparing it so that it's ready whichever way we end up going.
Yeah, and I'll speak for myself, but if that affects us with the KISA, OVT, or anything like that, we'll eat it, because you're right, the kids have got to come first.
Yeah, and our OVT understands that. That's a statewide problem. That's not just a Lansing problem.
And then the handbooks.
Yep.
Are we going to just 2 handbooks and?
Well, these are the major changed handbooks. I believe I mentioned that in our SMORE, is that this is a major change, and we consolidated all of the handbooks down for the parents and students, and so I wanted you to see that first. Everything else will be a very small change. We'll have the teacher handbooks next month for you to be able to approve. But this handbook had a major change, which is mainly a format change. But all of the information, Brooks Jenkins worked very hard, and the other assistant principals were involved in that process also. But Brooks consolidated them down. That was one thing that we had heard from many parents, is that it's hard to maneuver all these different handbooks, and so we consolidated those into one, the activity handbook being the same. And if you had an opportunity to take a look at that, You know, the main thing is that if there's a specific item, for example, you know, elementary school, it has all of those in there. It's supposed to be a one-stop shop for our parents. If there's anything specific about a school, for example, when you get into some of the academic dishonesty, for example, specific for Lansing Middle School, that's their procedure, and that was transferred from their handbook into this one. So that was kind of the idea behind that. We still have some other handbook pieces that we're still working on. So.
Well, I appreciate that, making it easier for the parents. Because we're knocking on the door the next academic year, if there's any changes to any of the other handbooks that we need to approve, if the author can put together a change document, just so it says, hey, page 1, we changed this, page 15, we changed it, and so forth, so we can go there, check it out, and we're not having to read the whole thing.
Well, and the reason that we didn't do that on this one is because it was a wholesale change. It wouldn't have made any sense at that point in time. So.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions about the consent agenda?
Go ahead.
On the fees, was there any change, Dan? I mean, I'm sure them, but.
No.
I mean, did they increase or decrease, or they're basically the same flesh?
Same.
Okay, I didn't know if there was a change, and that's why I was in.
Nope.
That's a good segue into my question has to do, I have 2 questions. One on the fees.
Okay.
So the fees that students pay for specific activities and coursework, the people who are in charge of those items, like coaches and teachers, like the woodworking teacher, do they have control of that budget and those fees to spend as they need for the students, or how do the controls work?
That money needs to be spent inside of that classroom. So yes, I mean, there are procedures for them to spend that money. For example, the culinary arts fee is based on the food that they eat, and so, you know, the food that she used to prepare. The woodworking fee, he has set projects that he always has, and so that is what covers that. Perfect example is the debate supply fee, and then the forensics supply fee. A lot of that goes to pay for their tournament fees in order for them to participate in those tournaments.
Well, I didn't know if the controls were given to the actual teacher and coaches of those fees to spend as they need and how they have planned, or do the principals control that?
Well, the teachers request those funds that then go through the process of approval that go to Mona at the high school, for example, and then Rob approves all of that. But ultimately, it's those things that that's the check and the control. But the teacher has control over what those fees are used for. It's all supply type of things.
Right.
So it's all consumable. Let's go with that.
So if the culinary teacher has $3,000 in fees, they know they can spend those $3,000 on their program. Okay. And then my other item is actually on the 2.6, and I don't know if we make a motion, but I'd really love to make a motion to change the time from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. on the calendar.
For the meeting?
Yeah.
For the board meeting?
Yes. Our meetings go later and later, and there have been 10, 11 o'clock, but I don't.
If there's a motion, I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? The motion on the floor is to change our start time from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m., staying with the already approved schedule.
What we probably want to do is pull that out of the consent agenda. Let's pull 2.6 off of the consent agenda, and then we'll vote on that separate. So
Let's do that.
pull it off of 2.6 and add it in as 7.5.
Okay.
Because on the consent agenda, we really should, if there are things we need to pull those and have those discussions individually. On any of it, actually. So if that's something that moving forward the board wants to do, you know, it's one question maybe, but some of the conversations that we've had, if there's too much in the consent agenda, we should really pull those out and have those separate conversations because when your public sees that consent agenda, they were really thinking that that's a consent and not a discussion, so.
So I move that we move the discussion in regards to meeting time from consent agenda to 7.5 for later discussion.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion, kind of already had it. Okay, what do you say?
I say aye. Robinson?
Aye.
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 Dolly has aye as well. Motion passes 7-0. 7.5, Danielle will be the discussion of the starting of the board meeting time. Okay. Do you have anything from the public, Danielle?
Yeah, that's consent.
Yeah, you didn't pass the consent agenda. You just moved 2.6 off.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I move that we approve the consent agenda as discussed.
I'll second.
Any additional discussion? No discussion? Okay. If you approve, please reply with an aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Consent agenda is approved. There are no public presentations. Anything on 4. Finance there, Dan?
No, not at this time. We will have, we did set the budget hearing. That'll be before our last board meeting up above on the finance piece. So far, so good on what the expectations are for us to be fully funded for next year, as I mentioned before. So that's they keep saying that out of Topeka, and we keep believing them in good old Lansing, Kansas. So that's our.
What choice do we have?
Nope, nothing.
Yeah.
Very true.
All right. Item 5, Lansing Education Foundation Emergency Preparedness Reports. Any questions or comments for the group?
I have a question about the emergency preparedness report.
Okay.
How involved is Kevin with the COVID-19 response and working with your team on that?
Kevin has done a good job of outlining and doing some research on the things that we need to look at. As for those everyday decision-making parts, not a whole lot because of his background in not in education. So I would say that he has done a good job of laying out, these are a lot of the things that you should look at and make sure that you have these included. But as for those day-to-day meetings, not a lot. He was very good with our food supplement program, and he took that under his wing. And his focus here lately has been, starting school with the crisis bags and first aid kits. So I know he was, and with our district radios. I know that the Alice part that he's extremely excited to get started with, as he had mentioned, unfortunately doesn't have any insight or on-site trainings that are close. He had looked at some in Illinois, but when it was a 2-day training, he decided he didn't want to go to that. So Mr. Bresser is going to help us out at that beginning of the year stuff.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yep.
So we're moving the luncheon like we had last year to the dinner, is that right, on Sharon's report? Was it last year we had that?
We are still planning on the lunch. That was, I don't know what word she used.
I believe in the report it says like in the evening.
Yeah, it's a dessert and refreshment.
That's just before the board meeting. I
That's
think.
before the board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read that.
This is a district luncheon that we had. LEF is partnering with the district to provide box lunches for all classified staff. And Main Street is looking at providing box lunches for all the certified staff or licensed staff at that point in time. And we're looking at just the box lunch. We're looking at some different options there like we did last year. And obviously all of that will depend on where we're at with our responses to our pandemic that's going on. But our plan at this point in time we can work on our social distance worlds and still come together for some sort of an event. I think this is what John was talking about and about the August 10th for dessert. They usually do that the first board meeting back of the school year, just as a welcome for you all and a thank you. So we need to also make sure Sharon knows that's 5:30 to 6 now instead of 6:30 to 7.
And that'll lead into the budget hearing?
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about item 5? Okay, I move that we approve the Lansing Education Foundation Emergency Preparedness Reports as presented and discussed.
Second.
Have a second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, aye. Motion passes 7-0. Item number 6, curriculum and instruction. Okay, any questions or comments about the administrative reports that we received?
I'd just like to say thank you to the folks that did provide us a report. I know there probably wasn't a lot to report, but they definitely showed some effort.
Yeah,
Just wanted to say thank you to them.
yeah. It's nice. Several of our principals are on vacation right now, but yeah, it's nice.
On Mindy's,
Mhm.
not that it's, the numbers didn't add up right to me,
Could you speak up just a little bit?
but on her numbers, for the grade levels, for them, enrollment, 191, 603, is that
He's talking about.
typo?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that.
Yes, it's a typo.
It must be.
Add in the kindergarten.
Kindergarten. Thank you, Danielle.
She's a numbers girl.
I have some questions on Dr. Becker's reports. And I see you sitting back there, so it's nice to see you face to face, so thank you for your report. I'm trying to, I've asked a lot of questions on professional development, and I was looking at the calendar, and so my first question has to do with how much time does the state mandate for our teachers to be in professional development?
You know that, Dan?
I don't think that there's necessarily a state mandate on professional development. Our
Mentioned in
our negotiated agreement says at least, we just changed that 10 non-student contact days, which I believe includes, would be now 6 professional development days, 5 professional development days. So, and that's at a minimum.
Okay, because I see on the calendar, so last year's calendar, there was 1 day set aside for teachers to work in their space, preparing for their students. Is that the same this year? Because I haven't found many details on, what to expect when coming back for the teachers.
Are you asking about the work day?
Yes.
Yeah, so there would be a work day at the beginning of the year like there always is. It's just that we didn't see any sense of, the PUC met as is the usual in May for the retreat to plan the year's PD. So that's a committee of the PUC reps, so there's teachers and administrators on that, and that's the group that sets the PD calendar for the year. After the calendar committee says which days on the calendar are PD days. But I haven't released the schedule because as we've talked as an admin team, probably that's going to need to change depending on the state guidance. So now that that's out, we're having conversations about if we do need to do some remote learning or whatever, the PD might have to look different to make sure that we're giving teachers all the support they need to be successful this year with the kids. So that should be coming as buildings make their plans here in the coming week or so, that we should have a schedule pretty for that.
The other thing is that negotiations this last week that was one of the things that the teachers had brought to us in order to do that. With our beginning of the year schedule, the other thing that's in the negotiated agreement is that we have 1 district orientation day. So of the 4 days, there's 1 gone. And then we have one classroom workday, so there's 2 gone. All the principals have some sort of an organizational meeting, so there's at least a half a day. And at the elementary school, you usually have a meet the teacher day, half of a day that is not included in the PD. So now all of a sudden you have one professional development day. And so when we had that discussion, as a teacher negotiations, Board of Education negotiation piece, the conversation was is that if we plan for that next year, that's entirely different than moving one this year. And so our understanding was that the principals would try to increase that amount of time for the classroom work time, but realizing that especially at the elementary school where it is the largest issue, you really have one professional development day at the beginning of the school year. And so if we give that up, now all of a sudden we have 0 training that would go on at the elementary school for any of our new pieces that we have. So.
Well, my concern there is a couple-fold. One day for preparing your classroom is really not much at all. You know, many of the teachers, as we know, teachers' jobs goes beyond a 9-month deal. Many of them spend 60 to 80 hours a week, and I know there's tons of teachers who are here till 7, 8 o'clock at night trying to get ready. Especially with COVID and not knowing what the landscape's going to look like at all. Instead of some of these other activities or professional development, shifting that time to where the teachers can utilize it to prepare for the upcoming year is, it's just my belief, being a teacher as well, much more valuable to the teachers to have that in class, working on setting up, getting ready for their students. One day really is not much. 2's not much. 3's the best. And that's why I've asked a lot of questions recently about the time.
And that's also why I believe that was brought to negotiations and that we had that conversation with Beth and John and Michelle, that next year we would definitely be able to plan for that. I mean, a large part of it, we hear a lot from the board about planning. The other thing is that our negotiations team and the board do not set the calendar. That's a calendar committee function. And so when they come to us, you know, you could direct us as a board right now to reconvene that and to relook at that. But it's really, you know, in our policy, it is a calendar committee function that they set that, not us, not the teachers, not negotiations. And that's why we came to that agreement that for next year we would be able to plan and to move one of the other PD days to the front end of that, because I do believe, I absolutely agree that 2 days aren't enough, 3 days aren't enough, and for many teachers 14 days aren't enough. And so you know the history of that. We used to limit the amount of time that they could be in the building. And a couple years ago, I believe it was with Daryl, you know, the understanding is that, you know, when we are ready on August 1st, you know, the buildings are open for them to be able to come in. Are they giving their own time? Yes. If the board, Aaron will nod his head, and Becky, I'm pretty sure, will nod their head at the fact that if you want to give them and pay them for 14 days at the beginning of the year to get their classroom ready, I'm pretty sure that if we approve, or if we bring that as something we want to negotiate, that they'd be more than willing to do that, and be well deserved. But it's also, you know, the amount of every day that we add is especially non-student contact time, is another day that they're obligated to be here. It goes both ways, and it's another day that we get to pay for. So.
Well, and I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking you to work within the means.
Sure.
And if the teachers come together and need additional time, do they have, you know, the right and authority to go to, let's say, Mr. Brungard and say, look, we really need the second day. COVID's got everything screwed up. Can they do that? Or does that have to be done at the board level to see if the committee needs to reconvene?
No, and I think that.
It's done at the district level, it's done at the building level.
Yeah.
So the building PD is co-planned by the PDC reps and the building leadership team, which is the teachers. So they have an active voice in planning what their PD looks like. So if they have a conversation as a BLT and say, for the instance, one of the conversations at the elementary is, we're gonna switch over to Google Classroom, so we have a better, a more consistent platform for parents and families, K-8, but we need additional training. So having conversations and then bringing that to the table of, we need more time, we think like we need this, and so they're the ones responsible for planning that. So they definitely have a voice and are able to work with the principal on planning that.
So when it comes to August, if, I'm just going back to middle school, the teachers come together and let's say there's 80% of them who say, hey, we need this extra day. A lot has changed in 30 days. Can they do that? And the principal can change it.
Because they're the ones planning it, absolutely. So if the BLT says, you know what, we overscheduled, we need to stop, we're gonna move this to September, and we need to take this time to work in PLCs to get ready, they absolutely have the freedom to do that. No one's restricting them on that.
Traditionally, the beginning of the year PD in the last while has been about a half of day to one full day at most of district-led professional development. There are things that when we set those, for example, at the elementary school, and they need Go Math training would be a perfect example. They needed some additional Go Math training. Holly would help schedule that, but it was with the guidance that the elementary school needed that piece of professional development.
And that would be basically the only district PD per se. They talked about having sort of an opening convocation, which has been a tradition, and I'm not sure if we'll have that now to bring that many people together. But the only sort of, if you want to call it district PD, is the teachers requested as part of our new adoption with the ELA resource training. And so I just coordinate that, but it's requested by the teachers as part of the adoption. So that'll be here, we'll bring in trainers from the textbook company and train the teachers, but that's really the only thing on that. But again, that wasn't something that's being done to them, that's something that they requested.
Okay. And then on the website, when will COVID resources be available for our district personnel?
When will what? I'm sorry.
So when you go to the website that you created and there's a drop-down menu for COVID, there's nothing there yet. When will those items be created for personnel to have access to?
Earlier today, I updated it with the infographic and then also our continuous learning plan, but there isn't much else to put on here as far as resources.
For teaching resources?
Well, because things are being done at the building level. So as they're adjusting the scope and sequence documents, it's dozens of Google Drive folders. That website is primarily to keep our OBT in the know as far as kind of what's the big things that are going on with teaching and learning. So I've tried to put the big things on there, but the day-to-day working stuff that they're working on, that's not posted on there.
Okay. And then the last question I have, and maybe we're going to discuss it later and I can hold, are we going to be talking about the COVID response and different modalities of education?
That's under 2020-21 school reopening and the COVID highlights. So yes, that's all part of that.
Until then.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Holly.
Dan, who makes up that calendar committee? What group?
The calendar committee is composed of, it's outlined by the negotiated agreement. There's one teacher from each building. There's district admin and one other admin on there. I believe that's mainly it.
And site council?
It's run through the site council. There's not a site council member on the calendar committee. It's set in policy. We can pull it up, or I can send that out in end of the week. Yep. And I believe that's been a question before too, especially with new board members, is the board is ultimately the last say, and that's why a board member doesn't sit on that side. So you can always say no with some guidance of try again. In essence, that's what it would be. So.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I move that we approve item 6.0, curriculum and instruction, as presented and discussed. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes 7-0. Next item, 7, Board of Education, 7.1, June 2020 Board Policy Update.
We had these policy updates, and I had sent the document a couple weeks ago for you to start to look at those with the said changes a couple weeks ago on the Board of Education. And so what we had was our July 12th policy updates, and these were the clean copies. Then, of course, Friday afternoon, there were a couple of errors that KASB sent the changes, and those errors were to GAAB, GAAC, JGEC, and KN. They were minor errors or minor corrections that they had, but if you have specific questions about those, I did go ahead and upload those policies in there. So it doesn't change the intent. The discrimination of GAAB, complaints of discrimination, these are things that I really don't think the board has an opportunity to say no to. These are regulatory that we should do. No different than sexual harassment, the GAAD, the child abuse, and then the complaints. The changes are not that great. I feel confident that you will make that change regardless, but if you want to wait a month in order to do that, because you want more time to review, you can also do that. So
you have no, from your position, you have no concerns?
I have no concerns.
I do have a question about that GAAB.
Okay.
And it's more internal. It refers to two different duty positions, the discrimination compliance coordinator and the discrimination compliance officer.
Okay.
Who are those people in our district?
Those would both be myself.
You can be both people?
Yes. There are things in the building. There are building folks, for example, the principals in our complaint form. If you have a complaint at the building level, you would want to start your complaint at the building level, and that's why the complaint form has been updated to include those folks. But yes, at that point in time, that would be someone that they would all come to my office at the complaint side. So
I'd like to change that. We
Okay.
need to separate those two positions.
Sure.
For accountability as it lays out in the policy letter. So
Okay.
I'll let you decide who's going to fill which position.
Okay.
But please split those up.
Would it be a good time to possibly look at getting an HR director as our district grows?
Well, I don't think anybody disagrees that we need one, but we got to
Yeah.
figure out if we can afford it.
That's true. You are. Your salary.
John's getting ready to retire. He's looking for a retirement job.
He is.
Huh? You have to resign from the board, but you can always do that for us.
Can't come back for 6 months.
We'll just let the work pile up for 6 months. Isn't that what always happens?
That's right.
Teachers would say that's what happens anyway. Huh? You can have a sub.
There won't be any human resources work in the next 6 months.
No. I don't think that would be able to do that.
Okay.
So
And then
So yeah, we can do that.
Thank you, Dan. And then on IC, policy IC, just an internal question again, it talks about making sure that our curriculum outlines are posted and available to the community. And where do we have those posted?
That is something that we don't currently have
Okay.
posted. So that is something that we would want to,
Definitely gotta get on that.
we would want to finish that up.
Yeah, especially if we're going to do remote learning, distance learning, if parents have access
Sure.
to kind of what.
And when I was looking at that policy, and obviously there are lots of things in policy that end up being, what do you do?
Yeah.
What I find on most schools' websites are a link to the KSDE curricular resources of this is what I do in first grade and this is what I do in second grade. And that's really the limits of what most schools have for that piece. So, but that's definitely something else that
I can
that we'll
safely
put
go
on
on a
the
limb and
list.
say that we're doing better than the average school district, so we should give credit where it's
Sure.
due. Any other questions on policies, concerns? This is always a tough one because it's, all of those things are grouped together and it comes as one motion, but.
You can always split them off if you'd
Yeah,
like.
Fortunately, we don't have to do that tonight. Okay. So I move that we accept and approve all policies as presented with the guidance given to the superintendent for looking at compliance coordinator and compliance officer. Yep, the end.
I'll second it.
To separate those?
Yes.
Okay. You second
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
that? All right.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes 7-0. Moving on to 7.2, the Kansas Delegate Assembly Representative. I'm going to assume that we're appointing that position in 7.2.
Yes. Right. We always go through that process. I believe John fulfilled that role last year. Had a, it's something that I believe we should fulfill again this year, depending on what this that obviously will look like. So,
That December again?
yes.
So, Beth, is there somebody that you had in mind that you would like to?
Not me.
Is there somebody that you had in mind?
I'll go.
John will do it again. I recommend that even if you're not the KASB Delegate Assembly Representative, that you go to a KASB annual conference. It's very educational, and it gives you an opportunity to cherry pick different workshops, the latest, greatest on negotiations and a lot of other stuff that's available, and it does give you your qualifications for your negotiations training for that team. And you get to hear from a lot of the people at the KASB level and the KSDE, so it's pretty informative. So I move that John Haddock be reappointed as the KASB Delegate Assembly Representative.
I
I'll
second.
second that.
Oh, go for it.
Any discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, Dan, 7.3, the budget work session date.
Last year, when we had, before the budget hearing, we had an opportunity to go back through, as we did at one of our work sessions earlier, to go through the Form 150 before, so you can ask all of your questions beforehand, so the board is all on the same page before that budget hearing. And I'd like to set a date between now and that August board meeting date. So if you can kind of look at your calendars real quick, if we want to keep it to a Monday. Danielle got the budget software, I hope, loaded today. It came out last week on Thursday, and we would like to be able to have all of that information for you at that point in time. So we can talk about mill rates, so we can talk about, kind of our obviously we know our enrollment because it's based on last year's enrollment, and so we know where those numbers are. But just for us to be able to go back over that as a group and see where we're at. So
I'm out of town on the 27th.
The week?
I'm
That
going to be
Monday.
going to Big Cedar.
No fun.
July?
Yeah.
I'm on vacation the 20th that week, but I can swim. My parents are moving that week, so.
I'm going on vacation on the 15th, and I'm not ever going back.
You must be going to Disneyland.
Well, not land, but yes.
What about August 3rd? Or is that too late?
no, August 3rd would be fine for the budget
Does that work for you, Aaron?
workshop.
I don't have any
Not
meetings
100%
that day.
sure on August 3rd. I'm good.
You do all these impromptu meetings.
Michelle, August 3rd work for you? John doesn't care because he's retiring.
He's not retiring. He's got to give me 7 more years.
Is that okay with you, Beth? The 3rd?
Third.
It's on your back,
I will do my best.
Okay.
What time on that? 6?
Yes, please.
And what we've done before on those is had food, so we can eat and go over that if you'd like.
Food. That's code. Okay, so I move that we identify as the 3rd of August at 6 p.m. as the date and time, location here, unless conditions drive us to use Zoom or some other electronic means, for our budget work session.
Yep.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Boy, it's hard, isn't it, tonight?
It is. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so be it. Motion passes. Dang, okay. Okay, item 7.4, the 2021 school year reopening.
Well, as I mentioned and have sent out to you, we received our guidance on July 9th from KSD about reopening schools. And it was literally guidance. Recommendations, not requirements, because they're not a requirement type of a board. And actually, that KSDE guidance is not state board approved until this next Thursday. So the things that we're talking about at this point in time are still preliminary, assuming that they don't come back. And there's always a chance the state board on Thursday makes their own decision as to what schools look like. That's not intended, it's not anticipated, but just realize that it could happen on the 16th of July from the State Board of Education. And so with that, I believe that there are some overarching questions that our teachers and that are working on this and our administrators need some guidance. Just that if the Board of Education doesn't support some of the things that, before we go way down that rabbit hole, then we really don't want to go down that rabbit hole. The other part of that is the way that we have chosen as a district, myself, was to wait on that guidance. So, as a good friend of mine says, we chose to go slow so we could go very fast. And because as soon as you know some of the rules, you can really lay out some groundwork that allow you to, down the line, do things in a manner that will save you tons of time. And so, with that being said, the big questions that I believe that we need to, that I would like the board to have a conversation about. We met on July the 10th as administrators. We divided the tasks. There are some tasks that we're looking at administratively at the district office. Those include some of our HR pieces where, yes, Cheryl, it would be wonderful if we had an HR director at that point in time. We don't. So myself, Christine, Holly, Mary Alice and I had some of those conversations this afternoon to make sure that we're in compliance with the COVID-19 Family Act that includes the amount of time that if you have to quarantine, that act is in place until the end of December. So when those things happen, we have to make sure that we have those guidelines in place, and those are the things that I am working on. I'm also working with our transportation director. Jimmy and I met, and that's what's in front of you. Some ideas from him that we'll get to in just a little bit. The other part of that becomes very building based in the way that we have chosen to separate and divide and conquer. That is, the question always is, who all is at the table in that decision-making model. At this point in time, those that at each of the buildings, they have their BLTs. We made sure to include the LEA reps to make sure that, contractually, we know the things that we have to address either contractually or to make sure that it's doable via the contract. Different buildings have different structures. They have some department heads, I know, at the high school that are setting in. Mary Alice has her SPED leadership team that has met today. to make sure that all of the things, everything from arrivals, everything from transitions, how are we going to wash hands in the bathroom, how are we going to do that? And then Cheryl, your question before, and this is the guidance that I gave them, but I believe it was a conversation that the board needs to have to make sure that you can support all of those. Is there are 3 different options, as I'd sent out to parents that we would look at in person. I use the word remote because online school or distance learning are different than what our state is calling remote learning. And they're doing that for regulations say that we will have 1,116 hours. And they are not going to waver from that this year. They have made that comment. They're not going to waver from 1,116 hours. So if we get a 2-week school quarantine, we need to have 10 in essence snow days if we're just going to tell people to go home and not worry about it. But what they did do, and the change that they did do for remote learning, is they have changed the way that we take attendance. What they're going to allow us to do in order to count kids that are working remotely is that you have to have teacher contact with the student in order to count that as a day of school. And so some of and they have a daily contact log that is going to be kept by the parents. They sign off on the fact that a teacher, and at the high school it doesn't have to have all 7 teachers. If that's the way, let's say we have to shut down the high school for 2 weeks, all 7 teachers would not have to have contact with their kids each and every day, but you would have to have a teacher contact every day in order to count that kid as being in attendance. So that's the big thing about remote learning and the big change between 1,116 hours.
And a contact can be anything, text message, phone call,
The
Zoom,
way
email.
they made it understood to me is it had to be a phone contact or a Zoom contact. It had to be an in-person contact. It couldn't just be an email. There will be more guidance on that. They actually haven't gone all the way through that document with us. They said, hey, here's the draft. We aren't going to take many questions, and start. And mainly because you also realize that it's kind of like me saying that we're going to have these 3 different systems. Our Commissioner of Education is kind of going out on the limb at that point in time also that the State Board of Education is going to approve what they have sent. So, but for me, and I believe all of our teachers, as I don't know how many people are watching at this point in time, but I had a lot of questions about, how can I view the board meeting tonight? That's why I make sure that you talk up, because this is our wonderful little microphone, is do you support all of these options as a board? There's getting to be a lot of conversation about in-person and making it as safe as we possibly can, which is not the same as fall. This is Dan's world, and I'm going to quit talking, set a timer, John, because I'll talk way too long. Thank you. Is we can't follow all the CDC guidelines and open schools in person the way that we do them, because social distancing in a classroom is not going to be possible. We don't have 1, enough teachers, or 2, large enough classrooms. And so if you broke up a classroom, you could have anywhere from, depending on classroom size, 10 to 14 kids. And so if the expectation from you all is that we're going to follow all CDC guidelines, realize that's not going to be possible with being in person and transporting kids on a bus and having kids in a classroom. So that's kind of where I would like to start that conversation, and I'm open for questions.
Dave, what's the penalty if a student doesn't have the 1,116 hours?
If the school does not have 1,116 hours, they wouldn't have to recognize our graduates. And so in essence, our kids wouldn't have gone to school for a year.
So Dan, what would work best for you? Do you want to go through 1 through 3 and then go around the horn for, because I know I have specific questions and guidance that I'd like to give, or at least table.
On which part?
I would like to know how you would like to negotiate this item on the agenda. Do you want to go 1 through 3 on your sheet
I think we
first?
should start 1.
Okay.
Yeah, 1. And just the conversation about in-person, punt and say go remote, or for us at some point in time, the hybrid means is that you're half the time on and half the time at home. And that becomes, we understand that I can do education pretty well if I don't worry about my families. But as soon as you bring that into a conversation, that becomes much more difficult. So I'd like to talk about 1.
Okay, let's do that.
Let's do that.
Okay, so we're going to just treat this kind of like an agenda item, a sub-agenda item to 7.4, look at 7.41, and the question on the table, as I understand it, Dan, is you want to make sure that the guidance that we give you has the options for students to attend school in person, remote, or some sort of hybrid system. So, from my point of view, I don't think we should change our mission statement. Okay, our mission statement has said and currently does say that our responsibility is to prepare our kids for the future. So that needs to be printed out, put it on the wall of your planning room, and referred to, because that is our ultimate responsibility. And I think that we as a board have to trust you guys, the professional educators, to use the means and methods in the ways to get to that, accomplishing that mission statement. Yes, we approve the textbooks and what have you, but you guys have got to be the ones who decide what's the best method. So, I mean, from my point of view, and there's 6 other people in this room, but I think that you should be able to use the methods that are available to achieve that mission of educating our kids and preparing them for the future.
So, I guess I'll go next. I agree with John. I know that other districts are using, all 3 as an option.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's on the table for parents to choose? Will it be dictated by the district? How is that going to happen?
From our initial conversations with the administration, we would like to see an in-person option and a remote option, because we have, from our surveys, we had about 11% of our families say that they would like some sort of a remote option in order for their kids to attend school. So if you start figuring 11% of 2,600 kids is getting to be 280 some odd kids. I'm pretty sure I don't want to lose 286 kids out of our current district. So I believe, no different from your mission statement, John, is that we also have to provide for our families in our current system. I believe that in order to break that into a hybrid education system, what we would like to do as an admin team is that would be an option that we would go to if times change. For the COVID continues to increase and we have to go to a socially distanced model, we would have some guidance in our document that says when we hit this type of community spread, and or if our local health department says these are our recommendations that you need to be socially distanced, that we would have that system ready to go. Our parents would need to understand that we would need to pivot at that point in time is a word that Commissioner Watson uses all of the time. And we would go to some sort of a hybrid system of 2 days on, and you'd have 2 days off, and then the third day would be some sort of resource for those that are most at need. That will be very difficult for many of our families, but at that point in time, that's why I wouldn't recommend that to be a choice on the front end. And doing that is going to be very difficult for our staff, I believe, in order to have that type of a system.
What methods were used to survey the teachers who are going to be responsible for this to see what they felt was best for their students?
Aaron and I just talked about that this morning. We had sent out a survey initially about what they felt was necessary for them to do their job. But with all of the change that has happened over the last 3 weeks, Aaron and I are working on that. I wouldn't say currently unless he's doing it on his phone right now. But we're gonna resurvey the staff members about that. We're working on, like I said, the survey that we're planning to send out. The other thing that the remote learning option would allow us to do, we do have staff members that are compromised, that are going to have to, that it's not safe for them to come back to school, and that could give an option. If we give the option, they could become, remote teachers for different grade levels, depending on how many we need. We do have that power through our negotiated agreement of transfer and assignment, and that would fall underneath that area. I believe also it would be very important, and actually Holly and I just had this conversation right before the board meeting. The one concern that we have about calling them remote teachers is that all of our teachers need to be prepared for that, regardless of what we're doing. And I don't think that's lost, especially when we did this last year and we started to have remote learning, that we have some structures in place, and all of our administration and all of our buildings understand that keeping that online up to date to where we can go from being in person one day to we send home our electronic devices and our chargers and our cords on kids. And if we have to start from Friday to Monday, that everything is in place for that.
And then I'm going to interrupt you.
Yep.
So in the decision-making process, I think where we are is still analyzing the problem. And so I think we need to answer your questions.
Yep, I would agree.
And avoid the what-ifs and the course of action development, because we haven't really developed, make sure we all understand the problem first. So if you have a desire to speak, please focus on answering the question that Dan has asked for us to answer, and stay there, and keep the hypotheticals until later. So is there any objection to supporting any? You used "and," so those options are all inclusive, is what I think you're going for, not an "or." So is there any objection to using any of those three?
I am leaning more towards the in-person or remote. I think the hybrid is going to be very difficult for our staff in a very difficult situation. I think if you plan 2 courses of action, it's better than trying to plan 3 courses of action with an in-person, then remote, and then some hybrid after that for the 5th day. I think your best option is to have an in-person and a remote option that last all semester, other than changes. Like if, in that case, I would say if a child or a parent feels that they don't feel safe for their kid to come in person, that choice is made to be remote for the entire semester. If a person chooses in person and at any time they don't feel safe, they would go to remote, and that would be for the rest of the semester, so that we could allocate our teachers, in-person teachers, remote teachers, and then if for any reason we have to have somebody quarantined, they can remove from in-person teacher to a remote teacher, because the concern that I have at that point then is we give them 12 days of sick leave, and then they have the 14 days given to them from the COVID Act but at some point, we're gonna have a teacher have to quarantine possibly twice. So
So
I
you
am
would like
supporting
the hybrid
two.
off the table?
I would take the hybrid off the table. I would add in-person and I would add remote. I wouldn't add 3 options where you're in school 2 days, off 2 days. I would have 2 options, in-person and remote.
The one caveat to that on the remote is we might have students that choose remote that we have to bring on site some. Just because it says remote also, realize that that does not mean that there would be no in-school contact. It would be that you would have to work with, let's say we have a sped student that needs to come in for additional help. We would have some of those options, but it would be on a very individualized basis. So it wouldn't be systematic, like what I had said before on
Pete?
I like whatever option is, as long as the parents have an input. I think it's important if we do offer both the in-person and the remote, that the parents have that choice.
So, I'm gonna put you right there if you would. Yep. So, I'm gonna take this off so you can hear me. Were you or any, go ahead and introduce yourself, I'm sorry.
I'm Kristen Delka, the sped nurse and district nurse coordinator.
Okay. So was you or any of your staff involved in any of these meetings at the building?
Nurse-wise?
Yes.
The nurses were not involved.
Okay.
I have been included on ours.
So John, I agree with you on the education part, that I think this lady here needs some input too.
Yep.
Okay? Because it's gonna fall on her doorstep.
Sure.
Okay? And so I'd like to hear what you have to say. And then I have another concern that Aaron brought up about, I mean, on our leave with people, if Pete goes to the Lake of the Ozarks and gets it, or Barb gets it, I think that's on her. But if a student brings it to her, that's not Barb's fault. And I don't think we should penalize them if we're gonna, on that leave and stuff. But I wanna hear what you have
Yeah.
to say for your people to, cause it's gonna hit you and your people. And I mean, I have several questions about across the district on some things, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. And what what's coming from KDSE, and I mean, if there's anything coming through the state nursing or anything.
Well, I think if you're just focusing on your number one right now, Aaron, I know you mentioned where if it's remote, then it's either remote or not.
For the
But,
full semester.
like per
Per
kid.
student. So if a parent chooses, in my case with that, right now we have 286 parents that don't feel, or students that their parents don't feel safe. So those 286 would start off remote and for the entire semester would stay remote. So then that way we can know how many teachers you're going to need to do remote learning. And then your students that are in person, you can allocate your teachers for in-person use. And then if for any reason a student needs to either be quarantined or their parents no longer feel safe, then they could move to remote, but it's based on a semester. So the entire semester, you're one until you choose out of the in-person option to remote, so that we can start allocating staff correctly.
Well, so
That's what I'm saying.
you're going forward with the planning assumption that we're gonna have remote teachers and we're gonna have in-person teachers,
And then,
that's who they're gonna, I don't think we're that far yet. I think your point is valid about staying away from the hybrid, but I would rather not walk the dog for
Okay.
the administrative staff here and say this is how it's gonna be. So,
I feel in the beginning, you're gonna have families who, especially within the last few weeks, we've had such a rise that they may choose that remote and then watch what's happening in our district, and at that point, after a few weeks, they might feel like it's safe to send their kids. So I don't know if it's something you wanna completely say you need to pick remote at the beginning and then you can't come back, versus letting people see that we can safely be in buildings.
So as a medical professional, what's the angle you're looking at there? Are you looking at the mental health of the child, of needing to get him back into the building? Or,
I think it's really important for all of the kids to come back. They need to have that socialization. They need the structure. I know I have 4 kids in this district. None of them want to be online again. They just, they're distracted at home. They need the help from the teachers. I have 2 that are sped kids. They just need that extra help that no matter what I do or speech online, it's still not going to amount to what they would get face to face. On the other hand, if it's not safe for everybody to be here, then I wouldn't vote for that option. It's kind of just to see where we're at. If you look at our amount of positive cases, the safer number is around the 5%. I thought I read today that Kansas was at a 9.1% of positives. It's extremely high. But we're not wearing our masks places. People are still going on their trips. But you can do those things, but you still got to be safe. When you're talking on the hybrid, when we closed down after spring break, how long did it take them, the janitors, to get buildings, everything clean?
Well, it would depend on what you consider deep cleaning at that point in time. I mean, when you start talking about cleaning everything in an area where you move it, you touch it, you do it, we take a better part of, I would think the fastest you'd possibly do that is 3 weeks, if not a month.
So
when you start
hybrid's not
thinking about
totally
it.
convenient, but if we're needing to give our janitorial staff to get those clean, like if we did Monday through Thursdays, and then Friday was the extra cleaning, I don't know if it's something they should wipe off the table completely.
Well, they have those sprays and those new systems, which I see, I think, is in the Spark spending outline too, which makes it, I think, a 24-hour process to sit, if I remember correctly. But I don't know with little kids how effective that is either. So.
Yeah.
they're nasty.
What are you seeing as best practices across, similar districts, size, metro?
The masks, they're important. I know it's hard to require that. You'll have students you have families that aren't going to send their kids if they have to wear masks. And then you have families who can't afford the masks. So I'm sure we can't require that, but we should definitely recommend it. I don't know what your thoughts are on requiring on the older age kids who can keep them on. We still come to, can they provide their own masks, or are we doing that for them?
Do the face shields provide enough coverage?
My personal medical profession is no. I work in a hospital as well, and I wouldn't wear just the shield. I would have a mask on as well.
Any other comments from Michelle about the 3 methods available to the district?
Are we done with the nurse so she can sit up?
Yes, she
Thank
is.
Thank you.
Kind of agree with Aaron on it, but
Yes.
the question is, how much are you going to get? Are you going to be, do you want to be kind of like, are you saying the 284 there? I doubt this is going to happen, but if it gets better, are they still to the semester in the?
I think you should set a time limit for it at least. And if you're hesitant on the semester, maybe you move it to the quarter.
Right.
But you have to be able to give your teachers the ability to in-person learn, and then somebody else is developing and restarting over with an online teaching and getting that done. And you can't have, I think it would put even more strain on our teachers if they go from a kid going in-person to bouncing out of person back to in-person back to, if you set a time limit and say,
Right.
choose one or the other,
Right.
it's helping our teachers educate the student.
Yeah, know what they're expecting.
and then they know what they're expecting. And I get that it could be difficult for a family to say, okay, I want to choose online, and then 3 weeks down the road, I want to put my student in person. But as a district, we have to prepare for all 2,000 plus kids that we have. And then we have to make sure that we support our staff so that they can support those kids. And by making them choose, you're either in person or online, even if it's just for a quarter or a semester or however we decide that, it's helping our staff be successful to set up to help be the students successful. It's setting guidelines and expectations for our staff, so then that way they can be prepared so that they can help teach our kids.
Yep.
And maybe a semester's too long, maybe a quarter's a better choice. But I think if we don't set that, we're gonna get a pinball effect of people going, I don't wanna be in school, okay, yeah, I'll be in school, no, I don't wanna be. I think that would be harder for our teachers and our staff to navigate, rather than saying, pick a direction, let's stay that direction for a certain amount of period, and then if you, as a family, feel this is a better option for you, then okay, here you go.
Aaron, oh, go ahead.
I agree with Aaron. I would also like to add with a hybrid, you know, when you're talking about elementary school children, it's a little bit simpler. When you get into the high school, and especially the specialized classes, if you've got a teacher who's teaching 6 out of 7 hours, and then trying to work with remote kids too, because they've got to make contact, that's going to make days a little crazy for them and really long, because they're pretty much going to teach a full day and then teach a full day. And
Would
that's
we
going to
do
be
that,
really...
We can't do that.
We can't do that. I
We
don't
cannot
think.
do
We
that.
cannot
I
do
think we
that
have
if
to
it's a
have
hybrid.
teachers either doing in-person or remote, but I don't think we can ask them to do
What
both.
if you only have one Spanish teacher?
That's the caveat
That's the
that we're
caveat, that's
in.
the problem.
So, can we hear from Aaron Edwards? I'd like to know his input on what the teachers are saying.
I feel more comfortable getting more responses from our teachers. We're working on that now. So I don't feel comfortable speaking for our teachers at this time.
Okay.
So I think we're accomplishing our purpose here. Dan's looking for our guidance. I think what we're saying is that we want you to lean more heavily towards the course of action that it has in person and remote.
I'm not.
Okay.
I think all three should be available, and you let the teachers decide
Well, I was just
at
going
their
to say
building
that.
levels.
I was
So-
just going to say make that maybe the
Oh,
least
sorry.
preferred of the three. You know, because I agree with Beth and Aaron that the op-tempo of the teacher has to be considered. And I'm violating my own guidance here about jumping ahead into the course of action development, but something that we can also say is if you're going to be a remote kid, you're still going to be sitting in front of your computer when your teacher is teaching that class at the same time to your kids. So that Dr. Stevenson only has to teach that class one time, and if Junior is there, he gets credit for being there, and if he's not, then he doesn't. And then that kid has the opportunity to raise his hand and ask questions and hear from the subject matter expert within moments. Let's not force ourselves into a mental model of what we did last semester. We got to open up the aperture and look at other options, and not lean on our biases too much.
I guess if you had to ask, kind of probably 6th grade and down, 5th grade, somewhere in that neighborhood, I'd really like to see in person. I think those kids need more in person. And then at the high school level, and I understand Beth's point 100% because
Yeah.
now you're kind of double teaching.
Yeah.
But I think those kids they should have a more of a responsibility of being online or whatever, to those kids. But it then puts a load, like Beth said, on our teachers, because now you might have some kids that do show up, and now you got kids online, and you're trying to do both, and it would be a nightmare for them. So, but that's kind of my.
So you all know that was a conversation at our admin meeting as we were talking about remote teaching versus online or remote teaching and in-person teaching. And one of the things that Mr. McKim had asked about is I really want to take that to my teachers and ask how they think they can make that work, because the high school is a different world than other grade levels.
Can I ask a clarification?
Sure.
When we talk about remote teaching, we're not talking about synchronous learning necessarily, are we? Or are we talking about everything being synchronous?
In my world, it would not be synchronous learning. It would not be the case, especially at a lower level grade. I think this is my opinion, and that's all it is. But if remote learning looks entirely different than just electrifying what a teacher does in front of the classroom each and every day. And there's no way that I can envision first grade, kindergarten, second grade, all the way up to fifth grade, where those teachers that have kids sitting in front of their class and the needs of those kids in that room, that they would be able to provide any sort of a synchronous education experience at the same time that they're expected to teach how many ever kids are sitting in front of them. And also remote learning and online learning is skillful. It is so much more than electrifying what you're doing in your classroom. Just as a great classroom teacher is very skillful, those that do it very well online, it's a skill and highly trainable. Polly, you had a comment?
And I would say that the way I interpreted that question was that if someone says, yes, we want to do remote learning, I do think there would be synchronous parts of that. I felt like that's what you were asking, not just live streaming the classroom and kids get on the computer and sit on the computer all day. But if I am a remote teacher and I have my 20 kids that decided they are not going to do in-person instruction for fall, then I think that there would be synchronous opportunities.
Sure.
Because they need to have that live interaction and check for understanding, check in, how is everything, work on some of those social emotional supports. So I think that the remote teacher would have to have the asynchronous and synchronous both. But it wouldn't be the in-person teacher providing a live stream look into the classroom. It would be that remote teacher working with that group of kids.
That's what I wanted to clarify, is that it won't just be a matter of watching class like you watch television.
I think that's up to them to decide. I'm glad you brought it up to make sure that we understood the difference. But I don't want to rule out any option to the people who are going to develop the course of action. I think they should have all options on the table. Any other questions on that, number one?
Thank you for your input on that. That helps us,
Okay.
I believe.
And number two, the masks. What's the specific question you're asking?
For whatever reason, masks are highly debatable in the world. The CDC says that masks are, for lack of a better term, the only safe way to not be socially distanced. But as when Kristen was talking, the idea that we will have certain people that will say that they won't send their kids to school in a mask, and if we don't make them required, they become recommended. And those are words matter. And
Yes.
so I'm looking for guidance from the board that if we change our policy to say that masks are required and now they become a discipline issue if you do not have one on, I need to know that we would be supported with that. And I guess as we've had conversations, I know the middle school BLT weighed in today and they said masks are going to be required. That's the only way we feel safe because we cannot socially distance. That if I'm supposed to have a conversation with a kid within 6 feet, and some people think that's even a little less, that the only way for our teachers feel safe, and this was the BLT, and I need to remind you, that is not all teachers. That is a leadership group that is built in that school, that they felt very passionately about that. And so that's why I wanted to have that conversation, that if we make them required, and that changes our student handbook, or we do the COVID-19 appendix, that would be a support from the Board of Education. Because if that's not the case, I think that that's going to change some of the I don't know what the right word is, but it would definitely change if some of our teachers are going to choose to come back to work. Holly, you were at that BLT.
And our Saturday morning curriculum chats, the way some of the districts are approaching it is they're purchasing 2 masks for every student and staff member. So this is your issued mask, and then beyond that, if they break or they lose them or whatever, it's on them to replace it, or they can even purchase another one from the school. So for those kids who don't show up for a mask, with a mask on, that you would provide them.
Sure. But the key thing is that they be required. So I guess that's and for whatever reason, masks have become a political conversation. And so maybe they won't be with this group, but you are elected officials, which in essence make you a politician. So I'm opening up.
On that, since I just received an email. One is, I don't think, well, I really don't believe we should have building to building. If we're gonna do it at one building, it should be across the district. And so, if we do adopt it, I think it's gonna be district-wide, and I don't think any of the buildings. And so, I mean, I would have to follow whatever CDC says. And I would take their recommendation, and if that's what they're saying is gonna do this, then I think we make it mandatory. But I'd like to see it district-wide.
I worry about the logistics of a K-5 kid. I mean, a kindergartner in a mask all day long. I worry about the logistics of how that's gonna go, how that's gonna be, and at what point is the teacher spending more time sanitizing hands and putting masks back on than teaching?
I think the kindergarten teacher's probably gonna be better off because kids the little ones are much more likely to just simply follow instructions. We tell them to wear shoes, we tell them to wear socks, and to them it's all the same. They wear them because they're supposed to. The older kids, I think, will take some more reasoning, but I think it needs to be required. We already know we can't social distance. We can only wash hands every so often, or that's all the kids are going to be doing. We have, if you look at our furniture in the elementary school, we have a lot of tables, so we're going to have kids not just sitting at desks near each other, but sitting at tables near each other where they can touch the same surfaces. So it's not like I have my little space here and Dan's got his space here. They're all kind of in the same space. We don't have very many control mechanisms, and we know that the masks are one good control mechanism. And if they're required, even if we don't reach perfection, if we reduce even the cases by half, what have we won at that point? If we reduce them a whole lot more, I know that where I work, aside from all the other stuff, we have masks and face shields because this mask helps me not to infect Dan. The face shield protects me. And so I think we not only need to talk about masks being required, but face shields being optional. Sure. I don't know that we necessarily should say that those should be required. Frankly, I hate mine. I think I've whacked myself in the face more times since I've had it than not. But at the same time, that's another layer of protection, especially for our teachers. I can't see the kids I can see them beating each other with them, but not maybe wearing them. But the teachers having that option, especially for our older teachers or our teachers that are compromised or pregnant or any of the other things that we have that, and they have that support. There's so many things that we cannot do to prevent the spread of the infection because we just simply don't have the physical controls to do it, that this is one very simple thing that we can do that actually makes a difference.
It sounds simple, but it's not simple, or we wouldn't be discussing it right now. I kind of go back to what I said earlier about parents. I'd like to have input from them. I'd like to see how many kids it's going to actually impact. Or are we going to have kids not coming to school because they got to wear masks and take the option to do online learning instead? And then, of course, we have our own county officials that have kind of made a determination that it's recommended, right, but it's not mandatory in our own county.
I would like to, one comment from Aaron's K-5 conversation is, Dr. Wells has mentioned that it is going to be very difficult, and she would like some leeway at the elementary school that, maybe we use them in passing, but when they get into their classroom, and think of it as a family, once one of them is infected, at that point in time, obviously everybody in that room will have spent enough time in order to be quarantined. However, that when you're in the classroom and you're in your seat at that point in time, that would be a decision by the teacher that they would have that freedom in their classroom to not do that, which is of difficulty, but it is also an admittance that K through 5 is going to be a different world than compliance at 6 through 12 will be much more difficult, but at the lower levels, that little kids also are developing language, and they need to look at lips, and that becomes very difficult. Cheryl, you had a question, I'm sorry.
Dan, are we going to be doing any other measures that might help with this decision? Like, I know we do temperatures and read off a list. I know that's pretty daunting to do at any school, but that might help in the decision making if we're being proactive when these students come in to help decide within the classroom, because it is going to be difficult at every level. I agree. I don't care how old they are. It's going to be another uniform policy type thing. So I guess the question is, will there be other measures besides, will we be doing temperatures or anything like that?
Here's my personal opinion. I think you're wasting time, and you're gonna waste my secretary's time and 100 kids checking my door. It's gonna take her 2.5 hours to do that, A, and B, about 30 to 40% of all the people who have it don't have a temperature.
Sure.
So it's a false, in my personal opinion, somewhat it's a false okay, you know what I mean? I mean, and it's, I don't know. You can walk across the parking lot when it's 100 degrees outside in the asphalt and come in and have 105 temperature for a minute or two, and now you're gone. Or vice versa, what happens come wintertime, it's 0 out, and the kid walks in and has 95, but he's really got it, so personally,
Currently, what our plan is, to answer the question, is we are currently taking them on kids as they get onto the bus, and that's something with the transportation piece that they have done. We have plans that at the beginning of the school day, depending on all of our entrances, and that's part of the plans as they come in. And John, you asked the question if Kristen is involved in all of that. She'll be involved as soon as the plans are developed and we see that this is possible and is not possible, those type of things. And because I believe at that point in time, the temperature check, as you say, there is equipment that you can purchase in order to do so. We have purchased the quick guns that you can shoot. You'll have all of the bus kids already in there. You'll already have all of the bus kids that have been scanned, but it can be very much a false sense of security. So when you ask the question of, will those take the place of the masks, in my readings, and I'm kind of looking at Kristen, I don't think any of those other measures that we're going to do include increased sanitation, includes making sure of a temperature check. All of those different things are going to take this is the area that I can do something about. And I'll defer to the health professionals, so.
I would definitely lean towards the K-5 having the ability, once they're in their classroom, to remove it based on the teacher. I think she's fully within her right as a principal to ask that.
So then what does the other principal say? Well, then I'd like the same option. So
Well,
it's got, I agree it needs to be a district-wide thing.
That is where they aren't changing classes like the middle school, like the high school. She's asking for, once they're in their classroom, to stay in their classroom. In passing, she's saying put on masks
Yes.
but I completely agree with the ability for her and her staff to be able to work with kids in that developmental time and being able to hear them, see them, adjust to it. I think she's fully within her right as a principal to ask that once they're in their classroom that they could remove their mask. Because once you get a positive, you're going to quarantine pretty much that whole class.
But they may not all catch it.
Hmm?
They may all need to be quarantined, but they may not all catch it because some of them have been wearing the mask.
And there's nothing magical about the passing period either. It's, so, I guess my what I'm saying is, if that's the way we want to lean, is leave it up to the teacher, then I think we need to do that across the district. And we could say, well, when they're in your passing period, you wear a mask, but we're starting to get down the road where we're going to eliminate masks. We are gonna talk ourselves out of masks here in a second, because we're gonna say, well, if we let the little kids not wear them, then well, why does the big kid have to wear them? Actually, a big kid's more cognizant of his symptoms and his feelings, and he's like, I don't feel so good. Whereas a little kid, you know, they'll suck snot until they go to sleep at night. So, I guess, again, the homework that you gave us, Dan, was to give you some feelings on the thing. I think you understand generally where we're coming from, and we get a little bit more time. And by the time that you develop this plan, we'll have a better understanding of what's going on. Because, again, this is about educating children first, okay? Safety is got to be a 1.1, but educating children is got to be the most important thing. And I do agree that the teachers know their classroom, they know their kids, and the principals know their schools. So I think you guys need to wrestle over that.
I think, as you mentioned, John, that pretty soon you talk yourself out of masks. The difference is, it's no different than if I choose to take my mask off and walk down the street. I am, in essence, putting anybody that I come in contact with at risk. And so as soon as one teacher in their classroom has that opinion that they don't have to wear a mask, at the high school, that would possibly also impact 6 others. And no different than in the elementary school. So the difference in my world in the elementary school versus upper grades is that you don't have any course movement. Those kids are already in a cohort group, which is a different world than in the other. So that's where, in my mind, as we go forward with our plans, and so I reiterate or recapitulate, would be, it sounds like that this board would be in favor of masks if that is and a requirement of masks, if that is where we're at in the CDC world, and how we choose to require them, will be so.
Dan, I have a question for you on
Okay.
that. What are your thoughts? I mean, you lead this ship, so what are your thoughts as a leader?
My thoughts on it as leader is we should all have a mask on.
The whole day?
What we will do in our office, your office becomes your castle. And so when you come in to see me, one, I would much rather I meet you somewhere else because I need to be safe in my castle. And so we're going to set up areas where we'll have shared spaces in order to meet, but my office is my castle. And so anytime that I'm out of my office, I put my mask on. When I'm at my office and I'm working, I take my mask off. And I think that's a little bit more difficult when you're in a classroom because of the fact that you have so many people. And if I couldn't socially distance, I would feel the most comfortable. I would wear a mask all day long if it kept other folks safe. And that's my opinion. I am more than willing to listen, as I have many conversations with Kristen. What do you feel as the health professional? And that's, I try to explain to her, we really can't do that. And she looks at me, didn't you ask my opinion as the health professional? And her and I have a good relationship with that, I feel, so.
So when will a decision be made on these things? I think that there's,
Well, as we move forward, and that's in the board docs piece of things, I feel like we need to have a special BOE meeting. Possibly, it might need to be late, 2.5 weeks, because I don't think with the feedback that we're trying to get at this point in time, that we would, all of our BLTs are meeting this week. We want to get some input from some site council members and make sure that we also have a chance to run all of those plans through. So you're talking a couple of weeks out. So at the late in that third week of July, I think that we need to reconvene for you to approve and to look at that plan.
so then the teachers would have a plan by the end of July, so
Yep.
they know what they're working with?
Yep.
Because I think that there's a sense of frustration on them that
Sure.
there's been no guidance or very little guidance. And
Right.
so the sooner we can get that out to them
Right.
and to the rest of the staff.
Well, and I don't want to, I'll mention no different than we did at the very beginning, and we can disagree on the best way forward, or the best way that we should have done things, but that was very deliberate. And it was deliberate because there's nothing like, if we would have started this 3 weeks ago when trends were going down, our focus, in my mind, would have been entirely different than it is right now as trends are going up. And like I said, I understand that the idea of it being very anxious times, we all live in very anxious times. People ask all the time about a crystal ball. If I had a crystal ball, this would all be done. We wouldn't have a mask on. So
We are where we are. We need to continue
Yep.
to move forward and learn from the decisions of the past. So let's talk about transportation.
the last thing is transportation, and I also printed out some things that Jimmy and I met on this morning, and Janine. It's very, we bus more kids than we need to. Any of those outside of 2.5 miles. And I think it's important that that second sentence is social distancing on a bus is not feasible in the amount of time we have to transport students. And so if it comes down to where our county health says everything has to be socially distanced and we go to a hybrid model, this board needs to understand that I can't bus kids and have them be socially distanced. I can have about 12 of them on a bus, and so I would have to start busing kids at approximately 5:30 in the morning, if not sooner, with everybody that we bus. I talked to Jimmy, and if we went to those outside of 2.5 miles, only those outside of 2.5 miles, one, it would increase the amount of traffic around the schools, and it would definitely be a burden on some of our folks. However, we would be able to cut our bus routes from approximately 26 down to approximately 5. And I think that I like to be on record as having said that, because I don't think people realize that we bus a lot of kids that we don't have to bus, and we do that for our community. It's expensive to do for our community, and so The idea there is we currently plan on transporting the way we currently have in the past with precautions of sanitation, masks, and recommending onloading and offloading procedures, which Jimmy has gone through some of those, about the bus drivers wearing masks and monitors. Student temperatures are taken as they get on the bus. Limit to 2 per seat. Families will be kept together. Limit to the capacity of the bus to the first 50 that sign up, which is some difficulty, and he and I had some conversations about that because I just don't know if that would be feasible, but that would be the 2 per seat. The one thing he did ask for is a $25 fee for every student under 2.5 miles. And the reason is that it's kind of a logistical nightmare at the beginning of the year, because if I'm signing up for transportation and I live inside 2.5 miles, a lot of parents just say yes. And they really don't have any skin in the game at that point in time, and we have to plan on busing all of those folks. And so that's one thing he would ask.
That's a deterrent then?
We think that if you have to at some point in time pay that $25, you'll think, I'm not really ever going to use that. And so that's our idea. I don't know if it'll work for sure or not. It's something Jimmy's asked for quite some time. And so I just wanted to make sure that I bring that.
So we would charge some kids for a service that we're letting other kids have for free?
We're going to charge those kids that we are not obligated to do.
Yeah, by law.
So, yep. Leavenworth, they charge any kid a monthly fee in order to ride the bus that's inside of 2.5 miles. That's a lot of school districts do that.
Is that 25 a month, or is that a one-time?
No, we're asking for a one-time fee. We have some costs incurred, setup of our card system. The cards aren't free. You know, it probably costs us 10 or 12 bucks in order to get a kid registered for transportation. And it's a nightmare the first day of school. When you get phone calls, it is not that Jimmy and Janine don't spend hours upon days, weeks, months, if we could have that before, making sure that we can, and they have 4 kids that have signed up for transportation and 14 at the bus stop, and we pick them all up. So his idea is overflow buses on standby in the afternoon. One thing that we do that he would like to see us change is only bus riders will be allowed to ride the bus from the middle school to the elementary school in the afternoon. Exceptions will be the teachers' kids that have to get over there. But one thing that we do from the middle school to the elementary school is our transportation hub. And so we put kids on the bus, we drive them over to the elementary school, and sometimes that would include parents that are just picking up elementary school kids, and they wait there for their middle school kids so they don't have to come over here and get in line. And the middle school buses are extremely full when they're being transferred over. So that's one of the ways he would like to solve that. The other thing is no friends riding home with friends. We have typically done that. Kara Wessel's having kids over today. And they just hop on the bus and we go and do that. And that's one thing he would like to say no to, just because of if you're talking about 50 kids and you're trying to really limit. Students will be assigned a bus based off of their home address. One thing that we end up doing, and we're very accommodating with that, but we have kids that we transport that go somewhere else that are outside of the walk zones, that it might be somebody that is going to a daycare, and that's where they'd like their home base to be. But we try to, he would like to base busing off of where they are at, because at that point in time, those are the ones that we're obligated to do.
Okay, so a kid lives within the 2.5.
Or inside the walk zone is the main thing.
Okay, so he lives physically inside the walk zone.
Yep.
But both of his parents work and they drop him off outside the walk zone for care, and you're saying that kid can't ride the bus?
We have some, I believe, in talking to Jimmy, that take advantage of that. because they don't want their kid to have to walk. And so they actually go to daycare, but they don't go to daycare. And so that's one of the things that we struggle with.
Yeah, I can see that struggle, but then the legitimate kid who really has to go outside, he needs a ride to school unless you want to go pick him up.
Sure.
You got it? All right. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of silly.
Well, and you've got the split kids too, split between two homes,
Yeah.
you know, and parents aren't home.
Well, I asked that very question today, and the discussion was he was really talking about the daycare piece. But that's definitely something that we can look at. I understand that. Buses will be disinfected after every route. We have ordered, and they should be here on time. We ordered them about 4 weeks ago. Some of the electrostatic sanitizers. The one thing that, unless we change everything that we're doing, and that includes the way that we drop kids off, all of our bus routes, which we can look at, that's not currently our recommendation. But the one time that we won't be able to do that is on that transfer route. And so I think, you know, when kids are being taken from the elementary, from the middle